Hello and welcome in today's exciting episode. Yay! It's the layer cake dress episode. Finally, it is all about layer cake dresses. And there's a green one, and check out this one here. Oh, so complicated. Okay, let's go. It's perfect. Perfect jacket. Now we will get to all the best layer cake dresses. This one, every time I get this one out, I fall in love with it all over again. I cannot believe how absolutely gorgeous these colours are. It's like walking in a forest, but you get to wear it. It is so absolutely epic. I love it. Anyway, the last 10 minutes of this episode are me making this dress, layer cake dress, step by step. So if you're here to see that, by all means skip ahead. But if you're sort of a beginner or an intermediate or an advanced beginner and you haven't really done anything this complicated before, what I'm going to do is talk you through my process, because you do have to sort of work from simple to step up each time to more complicated, then more and more complicated. So yeah, you can't just, especially because your sewing machine will just seize if you suddenly start trying to make it do 10 times as much work or 20 times as much work as you've been requiring of it previously. So it's best to start with something simple and sort of build up your skill level and build up your sewing machine's tolerance to hard work. So I guess this is a story of how I did this. And maybe it's helpful to you. So last year in December, there was Vlogmas where you make one simple thing each day. And I made this Butterick 6677. It's just a simple short dress. So the one on the left has sleeves. The one on the right is I had 1 yard of that beautiful front fabric. It's a Sally Kelly print. And then 1 yard of that bamboo print. And that was my first effort at using two fabrics in this. Also, the pattern, like the back was supposed to have a slit and a button that you did, so I changed the back slightly. And also you're supposed to put bias tape on the inside of the neckline and not have it lined, so I modified that and made it a lined bodice as well. And then I was like, well, maybe instead of having that sort of shaped skirt, I can use just 2 yards of fabric and pleat it down and make that the skirt out of that. And then I was like, oh, and actually I've got more of the top fabric. I'll make a second tier in the skirt out of another 2 yards of fabric, and I'll pleat that down as well. So that's how we got to this point. Oh, and the sleeves are from a New Look pattern, N6698. And I just like puffy sleeves. So that's why that one came from. And then this one was 4 different types of fabric. And again, you can pretty much just look at this and tell how much of each fabric I had. So you can tell by so this one here, this is a skirt. There's half of it used in the top tier, and then half of it I cut into really, really thin strips and I used here. So that one might be a little bit difficult, but basically when you look at it, you see that the top and the sleeves are made from like half a yard for the bodice, half a yard for the sleeves. So that was 1 yard of fabric. The first tier of the skirt is the same width as the second tier, but the second tier is twice as much fabric, so it's twice as long. So obviously in the first tier I had 1 yard of fabric. The second tier I had 2 yards of fabric because it had to be twice as big, and I pleated it down. Then I used that lighter ring is the second yard of that first layer fabric. And then the bottom one is like it's really quite thin. So it's 8 sections. So even though it's really thin, it's very, very long loop. So that's 2 yards of fabric spread over a really, really long loop. So we started with a plain, really plain dress, and then we decided to mix up colours, and then we decided to change the skirt out for just a pleated down one, or a gathered skirt as they're called. And then we added a second tier in a different colour. And then we got even more complicated and we made it like including the bodice. And then the 3 tiers of the skirt, we used 4 different fabrics in this one. So we're starting to build up the layers of complication. but we still only have one colour per layer. Well, sort of. See how there's this ring of fabric here in a different colour? I was like, what if for every tier you did multiple layers within each single tier instead of just doing one solid colour? So that's what I did with this dress. So the bodice, you've still got one fabric, but then the whole of the skirt, you've got all different ones. And how it came about was this fabric at the top, I only had 1.5 yards of that. So I was going to make a shirt with 3/4 sleeves. And I was like, or I could make a dress with lots of, cobble it together with lots of different fabrics. So yeah, you can sort of see, like I had 2 yards of the banana print, 2 yards of the lighter green palm leaf print, 1.5 yards of this one that I used on the bodice, and you can see I've made ruffles around the shoulders. I don't really like them. I haven't done it again since, but I'm glad that I experimented with it. And then I had 2 yards of the green one that I used for the sleeves, and here it is. Oh, I love this one so much. And because I had 2 yards or 1.5 yards of most of the ingredients in this one, I ended up having a couple left over as well. So I use them spoiler alert, I use them in something later on. But yeah, I really like the way this one was done. It's a little bit difficult to tell what is like. If you're looking at it, it would be a little bit difficult to reverse engineer it. Oh, I've got this other red fabric now that I didn't have when I made this dress. And every time I look at this dress now, I'm like, oh, I wish I had that red fabric. But I've got this is the one on the right. I made a vintage dress, this one here, out of 4 yards of it, and another Empire line dress out of 4 yards of it. So I have gorgeous dresses out of it, but I still, yeah, here's the fabric. I can't help but thinking, oh, that would have looked good in this. But anyway, I am happy with this dress. It's very summery and springy, and it's just beautiful. But yeah, when you look at it, it is a bit difficult to work out what went in there. This is another one where I had, this was actually inspired by a bit of tweed I have that's all these colours together. And I was like, I love this tweed so much. I want a dress, like a layer cake dress that has the same colours in it. And yeah, so I just pulled out all these fabrics from my fabric stash. And again, I tend to buy 2 yards because I most of the time I mean to make either a small dress or a shirt. So that's why I buy 2 yards. If I want to make a shorter vintage dress or a smaller vintage dress, I buy 3 yards. One of the more complicated vintage dresses, I usually buy 4 yards. But yeah, if I'm just buying it because I like it and I'll probably use it in something, then 2 yards seems enough for me. So yeah, a lot of these, but some of them I only had like 1.5 yards. I think the rust-coloured cherry blossom one, I only had 1.5 yards, and I love the sleeves on this. I put, I'm showing you the jungle layer. It's got flamingos, elephants, tigers. It's fabulous. And giraffes, so good. I love the cherry blossom one. And the sleeves have 3 layers on them. So I made the skirt, and then with the leftover fabric, I used them in the bodice. And then after I'd made those 2 dresses, then I was just being very experimental at this point. I used all the leftover bits in this. So I'd cut out some extra bits and I didn't use them. So then I used them in this. So the skirt is only sort of just under the knee or T-length, whatever. And so it's more of a vintage length. The bodice is the first time I did different stripes on the bodice. So after I did those 3 the layer cake sleeves of the last dress, I was like, oh, actually, I could do the bodice that way. So the front and back of this bodice are the same. They've got the different layers in them. And here I'm starting to show you how you can tell, like if you want to reverse engineer a dress, how you can tell where the tiers of the dress are. So you just look for the pleating. So if you can see if there's no pleats between 2 layers, then that's part of the upper tier. And if there are pleats, that's the start of the next tier. So if you're looking at this photo on Pinterest, say, you can see that there is one set of pleats at the bodice level and then one set of pleats halfway through the skirt, which means there are 2 tiers in that. So the first lot are 2 yards around, and all the bottom layers are all 4 yards around. So in this section of my layer cake learning, I went from doing just one plain block of fabric in each tier to going, okay, I'll have 3 sections in this tier, 4 sections in this tier, and then, you know, this really big bottom tier as well, so that the skirt just is absolutely gorgeously full. But I was still, you know, having this single fabric for the bodice, and at this point only the bodice fabric was 1.5 yards, everything else was 2 yards, whereas with this dress I kind of got a little bit like all the bits were all different lengths, and I found that really complicated. But then yeah, I figured it out. And I also made the triple layer sleeves. I did end up with some leftovers after making this one, and yeah, same with the one before. So I ended up using them all up in this one here, which is good. I think I went a little bit too hard with the one with the triple layer sleeves. So I needed one that was just sort of using up bits that I had, and just sort of, I needed a little bit of a breather because I'd gone a little bit too complicated with the previous one. So definitely take your time between steps. Speaking of massive steps, on Pinterest I saw that Zimmermann colour block dress, and I was like, oh, I think I'm about ready to do one of them. So if you want to screenshot, this is kind of the basic measurements I used for each of mine, because if you look at the picture of the Zimmermann one, you can see that at the top of each layer there's gathering. So what that means is that every single layer is slightly larger than the one above it, every single one. So as you can see in mine, I actually made 2. One of them's colourful, but this is the one I like better. It's the nature coloured ones. It's in greens and camouflages and browns. So you can see that some of them are pleated down and some of them are the same size as the one above. So I thought this would be a good one to show you now. So to reinforce the idea that there are levels. So there's just so many tiers in this skirt. So, but if you paused it and looked at each one, now that you're sort of getting the idea of the layer cake mindset, you'll actually be able to go, okay, so the first tier is 2 yards. The second tier, does it have any pleated down, or is it flat like the one above it? Okay, it's flat. That means the first tier is 2 yards. The second layer is also 2 yards. And you sort of work your way down and you're like, okay, the last layer is 16 yards around, and you know there's a gradation between 2 yards and 16 yards. So if you saw the Zimmermann one, oh, and with the top I used 3 different colors on the top as well. So what I'm saying is, if you see a picture on Pinterest, all you have to do is stare at it and you'll be able to work out exactly how much each layer increases, like going down the whole of the skirt. So yeah, plus I just have more footage of this one because it's my favorite. Okay, so these are the ones that I've made recently and you haven't seen yet because I just finished them. So now I've put them from simplest to more complicated. So we start with, this one has 3, but it looks like it has 2. So we've got the Liberty of London, and we've got the shirting fabric here with little tosses, little posies. So I've pretty much done layers instead of just big slabs of one fabric then the other fabric. I also have a third fabric which is a rayon in similar colors, and I've added that to the bottom tier. So if you look at where the pleats are, you can see that there's 3 tiers in this skirt, but it's confusing because the tiers have multiple layers of each of some of the fabrics. So yeah, so just pause it and go, okay, that's where the first tier is. Those 2 were made out of 2 yards a loop of fabric. Then it went to a 4-yard loop of fabric, and then the bottom tier is an 8-yard loop of fabric. Yes, I understand that. She had 2 yards of this, 2 yards of that, and only 1 yard of fashion width of the other one. So the Liberty and the floral toss ones were quilting width. Quilting fabric is 45 inches, fashion fabric is 60 inches, so 40 inches. So there's a bit of a difference, and it's confusing when you start out. So if you're really determined to make a layer cake dress, but it's your first one, I would recommend, if you're a larger size, then maybe the fashion widths, because they're, you sort of tend to cut salvage to salvage, and fashion width will give you, like, it'll be 60 centimeters, whereas quilting is only 60 inches or 150 centimeters, whereas quilting fabric is only 115 centimeters or 45 inches. So yeah, it just depends, but I would stick to one salvage to salvage, one uniform width, and then that way it won't be as confusing for you. So this dress here is the next least complicated. It's a vintage style one, and so it's sort of just below the knee. And yeah, I love this one. I just wanted something in just pinks and reds. And yeah, it's quite simple. It's got the dots on the top. The first tier of the skirt is pink and pink. The second tier is dots. And then the third tier is red on a sort of very pink base, but it sort of looks like it's red and white. So yeah, I love this dress. Absolutely love it. And if you're just sort of trying to get your head around the idea of tiers, then I recommend doing one like this, because it's just one color per tier, and it gets you, I feel like it was a really good stepping stone. And sometimes I'm like, no, I just got to do a nice clean one that's just one color per tier, and it sort of gets your head, it resets you, and you're like, oh, okay, that was a good palette cleanse. Now I'm ready for something more complicated. And then I did this green one, and it's 2 yards of the seersucker check and 2 yards of the rayon in with the dahlias, and 2 yards of that other fabric that I absolutely love. I ended up buying like a bolt of it that they had on clearance. So yeah, that's why it's in every second thing that I do. I finally used it all up, unfortunately. Anyway, this one looks complicated when you first look at it, but really it's not. If you look at it, you're like, oh, okay, it's 6 yards of fabric, 2 yards, 2 yards, 2 yards. And then instead of tearing it salvage to salvage, she's torn it lengthwise. So each strip was 2 yards long, and so I ended up with 8 strips in each colour. So with my 8 strips, I used 1 2-yard strip for the top tier, 2 2-yard strips for the second tier, which is 4 yards. And then to make an 8-yard loop for the bottom, I used 4 times 2-yard strips, if you get what I mean. So I sewed the 4 together and it made 8 yards, and I used that. So that's 7 strips used up, and then I had 1 strip left over, and I made the front and the back of the bodice out of those last 1 strips in each colour, or in each pattern. So there you go. And I do have a few offcuts left that I used in a patchwork. But yeah, pretty much used up the entire thing, almost zero waste. And then this one is a little bit more complicated. You probably saw, if you saw my patchwork vintage dress, then you would have, I kept going on and on about the strawberry fabric in that. Well, this is what I used most of my strawberry fabric for. I only had 1 yard of this, but I used it. And I also used the rose fabric. There's a tiny little strip of the strawberries in the top of the, like in the bodice. It does look a bit weird, but because I'd torn my rose fabric, black fabric with the roses on it, into 8 strips, I didn't have enough to make the bodice, so I actually had to use the strawberry fabric there. And I cannot get my camera to focus on that black fabric with the red. It always goes out of focus. If you saw the fabric haul where I showed you my black fabric with the red roses on it, I just could not get them into focus. Anyway, so yeah, and there's also this dark fabric here with the sort of magenta and dark red flowers. If you saw my Everything I Made in July video, you would know that I had a dress and I used half of it in that and half of it in this. So yeah, again, I only had 1 yard of it. So I just sort of cut it really thin and put a couple of little layers in. The strawberries, I absolutely love how they turned out. And yeah, I really love this dress. It's an absolute devil to get the camera to focus on it, but I don't mind that. I think it would be awesome if you could get just by prints that couldn't be photographed. I mean, obviously not if you're making stuff for YouTube, but I don't like being photographed or filmed or anything like that. I just, always ask people before you film, like, shove a camera in their face, please. But yeah, anyway, so this is that dress, and I really love all the layers in it. I just think it's so cute. I'm not entirely sure why I'm showing you this dress, but I like that dress too. Oh, I think it's because now I'm showing you the different layers. So how you can tell, see, this one here is pleated down. So you can tell that that's the start of the second tier, and those top three are the first tier. So yeah. And the bottom four are in the second tier. So there's 4 yards of those bottom four, whereas the top three, there's only 2 yards loop of that. So if you have a bigger bum or you just want more fabric, then obviously do 3 yards in your top tier. I do some that are 3 yards, 3 yards, 6 yards, 12 yards, but I find that the 3 yard loop at the top is just a little bit too bulky for me. So then I put another layer, like a little layer on the top that's 1.5 yards. So just sort of experiment and see what suits your body and your comfort level. And oh yeah, so here's the last one before we finally get to making a layer cake dress step by step. So this is the most complicated one, and I wanted to show you this one because I didn't have enough fabric for one of the layers. So on the front half, I used 1 yard of one fabric. And then on the back half, I used 1 yard of a different fabric. So, but I also wanted to show you the bodice here. So I've got the poppy fabric at the top, then mauve, then this graffiti, then mauve, then the poppies at the bottom. And then there's several layers here. Oh my gosh, there's so many different layers. And I've got sort of fuchsias on a aqua blue background. And then I've got graffiti. And then you can sort of see where the pleating starts. So you're like, oh, okay, that's the next layer down. So the top two were 2 yards. And then the bottom tier, the middle tier is 4 yards round, or 4 bits salvage to salvage. And it starts with that lighter layer because you can see all the pleating. So that must be where the second tier starts. So even though it's a massively complicated dress and the first time you look at it, you're like, jeepers, there's no way I'll be able to tell. You actually can if you sit back and you just sort of look. So the first tier is that lighter one, and then it's a poppy tier, and then it's a graffiti tier, and then it's another lighter one. And the lighter one is actually the bottom tier, bottom layer of the second tier, because you can see the mauve one. If I go back down again, now I'm just getting distracted with the graffiti. I'm still not sure about whether I should have put the poppy and the graffiti thing next to each other, or whether I should have put a little mauve layer in between so you can tell the difference. But I don't know. I like how complicated it is. Anyway, so this second tier has a lighter panel at the top and a lighter layer at the bottom, and you can tell that where the third tier starts because the pleating on the mauve layer is actually really clear. I actually did the mauve layer at the top of the third so that you would be able to see it, but also it looks quite good there. So if you saw last month's Everything I Made in July video, well, it's actually the last episode you saw, but yeah, you can see that the mauve rings are in that the butterfly wing skirt of that layer cake dress. Anyway, I used half the mauve in that and half the mauve in this. There wasn't very much of it because I only got a yard. It's double width, but I only got a yard, and they cut it crooked. So by the time I straightened it, there wasn't really that much left. I got 2 yards of the poppy one, which is why there's so much of it in the lower layers. And then there's a little bit of this blue base floral, but I only had enough to do the front half. So I'll unpin the opened up skirt and I'll turn the whole mannequin round and I'll show you the back in a minute, but we'll just finish going down the skirt. So yeah, I was like, well, I can either have this teal bit like this blue backed floral spare, or I can use half of it in the front, like use it all up in the front half and then use something else for the back. And then I just had that lighter fabric in the last layer. I actually had 5 yards of that light fabric, but I used 2 yards in a dress. So there's 3 yards in this dress here. So now I think I unpinned it and I turned it round so that you can see what I used on the other side. So this is what your dress looks like when you stand still. But I mean, you know, when you move, it just looks so absolutely gorgeous. Oh, this is the back of the bodice. So I didn't do the strips of all different fabrics on the back. As I said, I had 3 yards of this. So I think I probably used up 2.5 yards in the skirt, or 2 yards in the skirt. And then I used the inside of the bodice. So the lining is that fabric. And I think I used it for the lining of another one as well. So anyway, this is the back. It's got the front, I pinned it so you can see the ends of the front with the blue based floral, and then this is that same section in the back, and it's that mauve one that I was going to use as a Monsters Inc. Capsule wardrobe dress, but I decided not to. Again, they cut the fabric really crooked, so I did end up with that much fabric, but it was enough to do this layer of the 8-yard tier. And yeah, so I got to use the gorgeous floral with the blue base on the front, and the donut thing or Fruit Loops, whatever it is, on the back. So I was really happy with that. It meant that I got to use all of the blue floral in this dress, but I, also had something that matched pretty well for the back because it's right under the mauve one, and it's like the mauve layer sort of looks almost purple when you can compare it to the donut layer. So yeah, I love this, and I think that's really cute. You could actually do that if you wanted to get super complicated, although I think it would confuse me if I had different colors in each layer. But if you wanted like the front half of your dress, like if you're going to, a double feature and you want hot pink in the front half of your dress and all different blacks or black and white monochrome in the back, then you could do that. Like, for the 2-yard layer at the top, you do 1 yard in pink, 1 yard in black, and then for the 4-yard layer, you do 2 yards in pink and 2 yards in monochrome black. And then for your last layer, you do 4 yards of hot pink for the front and 4 yards of monochrome black and white for the back. And that would be it'd be super fun, very confusing. I do not recommend you do that first up or anything. And because I make bodices that are very loose fitting, they're pullover ones, if you have a flat chest, you could actually turn your bodice over around too, so that you could wear a black dress, and then you could go into the bathroom, turn it around and wear a hot pink dress. That would be so cute. Anyway, that's finally the end of this section. Sorry it's so long, but I just thought it would be better, instead of saying, well, in this one dress I'm making in this one video, this is what I did. I had this length, and then you just sew them together and that's it. I thought it would be better to take you through the steps of my evolution, and that way you can sort of look at your stash and go, okay, well, I have 2 yards of this, I have 1.5 yards of this. I know I need 2 yards in each of the top tiers, and then for the second tier I need, it has to be 4 bits long. So yeah, I thought this way you'll be able to look at your stash, or instead of going to the store and you'll be like, oh, I don't have my magical little formula. This way you can you'll look at stuff and you'll be like, actually, that's really cool. I might be able to use that. And I want to use it in the top tier and the bottom tier, so I need this much. Or I just thought it would be more, you'll have knowledge rather than just a list of numbers. And I thought that would be more useful long term. Anyway, enough of me chatting. It's time to see that final dress being made. So last month I was Blue Month and I made this keyhole dress, the one on the left. I finished that and I started the bodice for the other one, and I intended to make a big full skirt for that. This is the pattern here. It's a fabulous pattern, and instead of making it up as a blouse or a top, I made it as bodice for a dress. So it's fully lined. And yeah, I just didn't get around to making the skirt for it because obviously layer cake dresses the skirts do take quite a bit of time. So I set the bodice aside, and because it was Blue Month, most of the fabrics I was going to use were very blue. So the one on the left it's a little bit of olive green in there, but mostly navy and blue and lighter blues as well, and a bit of cream. And then the Liberty of London on the right is the one that I used half a yard to do the bodice, and then the other yard and a half I was going to, or metre and a half because it's Liberty fabric, I was going to do using the skirt. And then I also had this vintage one which I've added on the right, and I originally had 2 yards of that. So, and I had 3 yards of the one on the left, but I'd used most of it in a different layer cake dress that you would have just seen in my recent everything I made in July. Anyway, so I love these 3 together, but they felt a little bit samey. So I was like, because the Liberty is by far the most expensive print there. So I was like, of course I was using that as a feature, but I was like, what if I use this one here with the olive as the feature? Oh, and I was looking at an online fabric store, and they only had like half a yard of that left in their remnants. So I bought that, and I was like, yeah, those 4 look good together. It sort of lightens it a bit more. But then, yeah, I decided to add a little bit of olive from the because the other one has olive in it. I know this one doesn't have any olive in it. It's just blues. But this one does have the olive and the cream. And it just, I don't know, I feel like it breathes life to add the olive in there. It makes everything else more vibrant, all the other blues more vibrant and less same. So I added that one in, and yeah, I decided these were going to be my colours for my fabrics for the layer cake dress for that keyhole with the keyhole bodice. But as I said, I was a little busy, so I set them aside, and but I was really happy with this mix. I think it balances and sort of catches the eye beautifully. I think they're a really interesting and weird mix because there's vintage, there's historical floral motifs, there's that 1930s style vintage print, and the Liberty of London, so very English one as well. So anyway, that was last month. This is this month. It's time to get this off the hanger and actually finish this dress. So here we are, it's on the mannequin. So that is what the bodice is going to be like. And now I've started on the actual dress. So I cut them all into strips, and which part of the dress each fabric would be in was largely dictated by how much of each fabric I had. So I decided to add a black fabric with little bits of blue on there. That's left over from another dress as well. So I just have this thin strips, and I just thought it would sort of break everything up, and if I had 2 blues together it would make them feel less same. So this is the top of the first tier, and it's 2 widths across. So I had enough to do 2 bits of the vintage, 2 bits of the one with the floral with the olive, and 2 bits of the black with the blue flowers. So that is going to be my top tier, and it's just a long strip at the moment. I have to sew it together at the ends to make it a big loop. So it's about 2 yards or 2.5 yards long, and I'm going to pleat that down. And on the other mannequin, the mannequin on the right, we have the royal blue coloured one with the jaguars, and that is for the large jungle cats and the jungle foliage. I think I said half a yard earlier, didn't I? I think I got a whole yard. Anyway, it was enough to do 8 strips. So yeah, obviously it would be a whole yard. Otherwise, they would be super thin. Anyway, so I cut that into 8 strips, and that's going to be right round the bottom. So all we have left is the Liberty of London blue print and the 1930s olive print with the tiny pink and white flowers. So this is going to be the second tier. I used the olive here because I wanted it near that bright, that royal blue at the bottom. So the top of the skirt's going to go the black with the blue flowers, then the vintage with the tealish background, then the olive one with the wheat and the historical motifs. Then is going to come the second tier with the Liberty of London in all the blues with the cream. And then is going to be the olive one with the 1930s ditzy flowers. And then at the bottom is going to be that vibrant royal blue with the jungle cats and the jungle foliage. So my next step, I have to sew these two bits together and make them one big loop for the second tier. And the first tier, again, it's just a big strip at the moment. So I have to sew those ends together so it's a big loop. And once that's done, I've got 3 loops of fabric for 3 tiers. I will pleat them all down and sew them together. So I finished the first tier, that's now in one big loop. But as I was sewing all of the other bits together for tier 2, because there was 4 bits and I had to sew them all together into one big loop. I was like, actually the rayon, the olive one is rayon and the top one you pleat down. And I was like, I don't really want to pleat down the Liberty of London. So if I add another one to the bottom, I can sort of balance out the colours and turn it around and have the olive at the top. And that way I pleat down the rayon and I keep all the visual impact of having the London of Liberty. So I had to add another layer to this, which took forever, and I didn't film it because I was losing the light at this point. Well, I was going to, because I still had loads to shoot. So anyway, I ended up adding another tier to that. So now there's 3 layers in tier 2. And once that was done, I was like, okay, fine. Now I will sew tier 1 and tier 2 together. So I pleated them down. So you find half, you do the sides first and then you do the front and the back. So that's quarter, and then you do an eighth, then you do a 16th. And once you've got those, then you pleat it down. Then you machine sew it. You can gather, but I think pleating looks much more flattering. So this is tier 1 and tier 2 together. And I was like, actually, it's kind of, I want to see what this length looks like with the bodice on first before I add the third tier. Because I just did the collections video for July and I have a lot of maxi length layer cake dresses. So anyway, I sewed the bodice and the first 2 tiers together and I really like this length. I think I will leave it like this for now, partly because I'm losing the light and I'm running out of time, but partly because I really like it. It's a good late summer length, and I mean, I'll keep the other bit. If I don't use it in this dress, I'll use it in another layer cake dress, but and this is it with the sash on there. So yeah, I really like it this length. It's less weight because the maxi ones, I absolutely love the maxi ones, but they do weigh down just because they're so massive. So yeah, I'll see. I'll keep it this length just for a bit. Oh, and then I pinned the skirt out so you can see what it would look like twirling, or how awesome the skirt is, because I feel like sometimes you can't tell unless you actually see the skirt either twirling, spinning around, someone wearing it and spinning around, or you actually pin it out like this, because these skirts are they're the most awesome part of these dresses. They really are. And I think the colour balance is absolutely gorgeous, especially I changed the sash to this sort of dark green, forest green one, and it is so beautiful. It's sort of halfway between a dark blue and that olive green, and the balance is just gorgeous. I love this. But I do think if I do end up adding that sort of royal blue one with the jungle cats and the jungle foliage, I think that will mesh well. So yeah, and this is me holding it out and see. It's gorgeous. I love this. It moves beautifully. The motion is absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with this. And of course, in the cooler months, I'll just wear a long sleeve t-shirt under the top, like a black long sleeve t-shirt, and maybe a hoodie over the top, and it will look like a skirt. So that's pretty awesome. I'm very, very happy with this. And then I just did this again because I love the fluidity of the skirt. It's just so pretty. I love it. So there you have it. I finished my new dress. And yeah, now I've just got a short clip of the big fanned out skirt of each of the dresses that I showed you here, because I just love them. When they're fanned out like that, I just love them so much. It's like, the only thing better is twirling in one of these dresses. They're just so glorious, and they take so long to make that, yeah, it's good to have a little bit of an inspiration pick at the end here, because, yeah, you really will be putting in the time with these dresses. But it's so completely worth it. A vintage one with just 7 layers is a good place to start. But as I said, your sewing machine, oh, this is my favorite. I kept a really long clip of this one. These colors, it's like a forest with moss on rocks, and I just love everything about this dress. It's gorgeous. Anyway, so yeah, you really have to get you and your sewing machine used to how long it takes, because your sewing machine will just seize if you try and do a massive, intricate, multi-layered one first up. Also, it will just take forever. So I definitely recommend one of that previous one there, that, each tier is just one color or one piece of fabric, and you sew them together. So you get used to the whole process of making it. And then sort of each time you do a successful one, then you can add another complication to the way you're making it. And that way you don't, you're building on your skills and you're improving your technique, and you're making increasingly more interesting and more complicated makes, but you're also sort of pacing yourself so you won't sort of stress yourself out too much and collapse and heap. Anyway, good luck with your layer cake dressmaking. I highly recommend it. 10 out of 10 stars. Happy sewing!